For the longest time, the Sonic fan game scene has been dominated almost entirely by 2D Sonic fan games, which makes sense, because it's a lot harder to make a 3D game, but they were inevitably going to start cropping up, and nowadays we've actually started to see a number of 3D Sonic fan games showing up, and what I find especially exciting about 3D Sonic fan games is that while most 2D Sonic fan games seem to be focused on recreating the kinds of experiences that already exist in official 2D Sonic games, my favorite 3D Sonic fan games are the ones that are trying to do something that's never been done in an official Sonic game before. So in this video, I want to highlight some of my personal favorite 3D Sonic fan games. And of course, right off the bat, it's probably not surprising to any of my fans that Sonic Utopia would be featured here, because Sonic Utopia is very close to what I've kind of always wanted to see from 3D Sonic, which is an accurate translation of the original 2D Sonic games to 3D. You know, you see so many people all the time that are fans of, like, the adventure games or whatever, talking about how that could never work, and it's like, how do you know that? No one's ever tried. And then someone tries, and it's like, oh, it works, and it's really fun, and it's really good. Even visually, this captures the kind of vibe that I've always wanted to see from a 3D Sonic game. You know, I have a preference for classic Sonic, and people are always like, well, I gotta change Sonic's design to make him look good in 3D. And I'm like, you sure about that? Because I see this little classic boy running around in 3D here, and he's super well animated, and I think he looks fantastic. Doesn't have that stupid, modern, classic Sonic in the official stuff that we see, where he's, like, overly cutesified. Here we have real classic Sonic with a good blend of cute and cool. Clearly a lot of influence from the CD animations going on here, and it's great. In so many ways, Sonic Utopia is a great showcase for everything that I've ever wanted to see out of a 3D Sonic game. Now that said, it's not like Utopia is a full proper 3D Sonic experience or anything. This is, at the time of this video, still just a one-level demo, and who knows if it's ever going to be anything more than that. But I still wanted to highlight Utopia because this game is incredibly important for what it did for the Sonic community, more so than being a fun game. This game showed everyone that there is another way to make 3D Sonic games besides the terrible way that Sonic Team has been doing it since Sonic Adventure. This showed that you can have a 3D Sonic game that's not a bunch of hallways floating over a void of nothingness. This showed that you can have a 3D Sonic game that doesn't need scripting and splines to go through loops and speed set pieces. This showed that springs can maintain your speed and be much more interesting. This game showed that the homing attack sucks because it has a much more interesting version of it here. For one, when you hit the enemy, you don't lose all your speed and bounce straight up. You just plow through them on the same trajectory that you were already moving with. Meaning now you can, like, imagine the line between Sonic and the enemy and get him into position to aim him in the direction you want to launch him, which opens up a lot of cool possibilities for shortcuts you can create. Also makes homing attack chains more interesting because you have to line Sonic up so that way he launches in the direction of the next enemy. Also a cool property of the homing attack in this game, it can instantly redirect your speed in a way you can't do normally, because you got momentum in this game. The faster you go, the harder it is to turn. But if you see an enemy and you line it up right, you can use that to redirect yourself, and that's not just based off of your horizontal speed, it's your vertical speed too. So you launch yourself off of a big ramp and you're falling with a ton of speed, you can use the homing attack to convert that fall speed into forward speed. And that's super cool! The homing attack could be so much more than just repeatedly press the jump button like it's been in the official games ever since Sonic Adventure. And all it took was someone saying, hey, what if we did something a little different, a little new? What if we tried to make this interesting? And boy, let me tell you, the physics of Sonic Utopia are pretty great. Not perfect, not 100% one-to-one to the original games, and I do think there's a couple of minor problems here, but in general, very faithful to the 2D Sonic games, down to, like, minute things you can do in the 2D games that work here, like spin dashing up a slope, but jumping right before you start running on the walls, so that way you can control your height and land on the platform exactly. That works and feels just like it does in the original Sonic games. And in general, a lot of the platforming setups here feel like the kinds of things that you would see in the 2D Sonic games. Like this one part in the Labyrinth Zone area, where you spin dash up the wall and then jump away from it. It's a simple thing, and you do it all the time in the 2D Sonic games, but I don't think they've ever had that kind of level design in a 3D Sonic game before, for some reason. And God, now that all the speed stuff is in your hands, it feels so good when you get up to speed and you can maintain your speed through these big winding paths, because now you have to steer and stay on the path and make sure you don't overturn to lose speed. You also get legit enemy bouncing in this game, which, once again, a thing that's never been done in an official 3D Sonic game for some reason, and it feels great, and it's really fun. And see, that's the thing with Utopia. It's not even necessarily that this game is some masterpiece or anything. It's not like it takes all these 2D Sonic conventions and brings them into 3D in this amazing, phenomenal way. It's just that it was the first game to do it at all and show that these things work and they can be good. They have the potential to be really fun in a 3D Sonic game. I'll say now, as much as I have been praising this game, I don't at all think that this is perfect or the end-all be-all of what I want out of 3D Sonic, and I think there are problems here. Like, straight up, I think the level design in Sonic Utopia here is really bad. Like, it's a clusterfuck. It's a total mess, and I think there's a lot of problems here. But, you know, this isn't a real level. It's a playground that's just meant to give you the opportunity to experience these physics in 3D and experiment around and just see what could be in a full, proper Sonic game like this. And another thing I want to say is that after Utopia came out, there was a lot of buzz around this game and a lot of conversation about this kind of 3D Sonic game versus, like, the way Sonic Team has been making Sonic games for so long, saying how this is clearly made by a much better developer who knows what they're doing and is much smarter and blah blah blah, all these things. But really, I don't think that's a fair thing to say, because I don't necessarily think that Sonic Team couldn't make a 3D Sonic game like this. I think they don't want to make a 3D Sonic game like this, because quite frankly, I think this game is asking for way more from the player than what Sonic Team wants out of their games. I think Sonic Team wants to make games that, like, 3-year-olds can play. They don't want a game that's even slightly demanding in any significant way. Forces and Frontiers has made that pretty clear to me. So stuff like, why are all the loops and speed set pieces scripted in the 3D Sonic games? Because if you had to manually run through them yourself, then you could screw them up, and they don't want that to happen. They want them to just play out the way they're supposed to, so they don't give you control. The homing attack being super simplistic and basic in them, I think that's intentional, because if you had a homing attack that was more involved like this one, and you demanded the players to understand it and use it, people would struggle with that, and they'd run into problems, and Sonic Team clearly does not like that happening. That's the whole reason that, like, dash panels and stuff exist, right? Like, you look at Sonic 1, people play that, and they can't figure out how to get Sonic to run up the slope, because they don't understand building speed. So we put in the spin dash, and that's a solution for it, but still, some players have problems, so okay, we'll just put dash panels and we'll make it scripted, so that way everyone can get through the loop and it'll be fine. You just whittle away that manual control over time till you create this safe, controlled environment where it's very difficult to screw up. I mean, why do you think there's so little, like, real 3D platforming in so many 3D Sonic games? Because then you'd have to, like, manually steer and control your character to make sure they land on top of the platform. No, that's asking for way too much. Just have them do homing attack chains or have, like, springs and ramps launch them to the platforms. That's much safer. And dear God, don't even think about giving the players manual camera control during obstacle course levels. Are you crazy? You expect someone to look manually themselves at where they're going? So, fully automated cameras anytime you're in, like, a proper real Sonic level. Even to this day, we see all these same things in Shadow Generations. I do not think that these kinds of elements come from incompetency by Sonic Team. They are very clearly choices that they want Sonic games to be like that, and they don't want Sonic games to be like this. And, I mean, I guess it's up to them what they want their games to be, but personally, I find something like this way more interesting and engaging and fun. But at the end of the day, Utopia is still just a one-level demo, and while I can and have run around it for hours making my own fun, I would like to see this kind of gameplay in more of a real, fleshed-out, full game. And thankfully, since Utopia, clearly many other people have been enthralled by this new style of making a 3D Sonic game, and we have started to see a number of games try to go in this direction, including another 3D Sonic fan game, Sonic GT, and this game is actually complete. But don't get too excited when I say complete. It's not like it's a full game experience here. It's only 4 levels plus the tutorial, but they are 4 fun levels, and I think this game is very, very cool. As you can see, this game has a similar kind of gameplay formula to what Utopia had going on. Full big 3D Sonic gameplay, manual camera control, big sprawling levels, no scripting or automation or anything. But it's a little bit more fleshed out with some more mechanics. You got rail grinding here, and you can crouch while going downhill on the rails to speed up, so that's pretty cool. You got multiple playable characters, each with slightly different movesets, but I think the big thing that this has over a Sonic Utopia is real level design, real, proper, linear obstacle course levels for you to blast through as quickly as you can. You got a lot of routes in these levels, lots of paths winding around each other, and it doesn't necessarily follow, like, traditional Sonic level design formula of, like, top paths being better. It's kind of more like Sonic Advance 2, where you want to be jumping from path to path, whatever is the fastest route at this given moment. So it's a lot less obvious what is the optimal path you want to take to these levels, and there's a lot more room for experimentation and figuring it out, which is a good time. And there's also collectible Chaos Emeralds here, and you can get yourself Super Sonic and mess around with him as a super overpowered character. I will say, I think the characters is one of the weaker aspects of Sonic GT. Not a huge criticism, it's just a small little fan game to experiment around, so I don't want to get on their case that badly, but if I'm going to critique the game, I'll critique the game and say that a lot of characters don't really seem super useful to me. Like, in a lot of the gameplay here you've seen, I've been playing as Mighty, because Mighty is kind of just a better Sonic, because Sonic's ability is the drop dash, but then Mighty has his hammer drop plus drop dash, so it's kind of just the same thing but better. And then, like, Shadow is not really useful at all to play. And then Super Sonic is just a super broken, overpowered character. But then Classic Sonic is also kind of that. And Ray can fly like he can in Mania, which is, like, neat and all, but it means you don't even really play the levels. I just don't really feel that the different playable characters offer a very worthwhile experience here. Once you kind of master a level with any one character, you kind of master it with all of them. And I guess while I'm criticizing the game a bit, I'll say I don't think the level design here is, like, phenomenal. I think it's a step in the right direction over Utopia for, like, this kind of 3D Sonic game. But this game, like many 3D Sonic games in this style, and many Sonic fan projects and fan games and mods and stuff, run into the same problem that I have, which is the lack of air drag. And for anyone unfamiliar, air drag is a mechanic in almost every single Sonic game that just means that while you're going through the air instead of running on the ground, your character is going to be slowing down. And that is done to limit the effectiveness of flying over everything using your speed. And because many of these games lack that, that's exactly what you can do. Like, you just go soaring in this game, and it's like, well, there's all that level design that does not matter to me. And of course, it's a bit of a struggle and a balance you need to strike, because you want to give players the satisfaction of zooming super fast through these levels, and part of that is launching yourself off of ramps and going flying, but you don't want it to be so powerful that this becomes a problem, because I see this in many 3D Sonic fan projects. Like, Utopia has this same problem, Spark the Electric Jester 2 has this same problem, and many, like, Sonic physics mods that I see, especially for, like, Frontiers, have this same kind of problem as well. You know, there's a reason that they implemented air drag all the way back in the original Sonic games. Just think about it. When you imagine Sonic doing his thing, what do you think of? You think of him running along the ground at ultra high speed. You don't think of him soaring over everything the entire time, right? So we need to rein that in a little bit and make sure that most of the time the player is keeping their feet on the ground. But that aside, I still think Sonic GT is a really fun game. I really enjoy it, and I would recommend you check it out. And I would especially recommend you check out the developer's next project, Rolling Rascal, clearly a Sonic-inspired game that's essentially taken the gameplay here from Sonic GT and evolving it and taking it to that next step. And there's a demo out for it if you want to check it out. I've played it. It's pretty cool, so I'm looking forward to that. And now we move on to the final 3D Sonic game I'll be covering in this video, my personal favorite 3D Sonic fan game, one of my favorite 3D Sonic games, period, and probably my favorite Sonic fan game of them all, Sonic Robo Blast 2. Shouldn't really be too surprising, I think. This is the Sonic fan game. If you know one Sonic fan game, you know Sonic Robo Blast 2. This game has been around for a very, very long time. Its development actually began before the release of Sonic Adventure. And as many people know, it is made in a super heavily modified source port of the Doom engine. Many people like to call this game a Doom mod, but it's really not. I mean, Doom can't do anything even close to what this game can do. But being the technology used to make the game, Sonic Robo Blast 2 has a lot of limitations of what it can and cannot do. Like, there are no loops in this game, you can't really run on walls or ceilings or anything here. And yet, despite those limitations, I feel that as far as the overall design and game feel goes, Sonic Robo Blast 2 is actually the closest a 3D Sonic game has ever come to feeling like the original Sonic games to me. As great as things like Utopia and GT are, those kinds of games are very speed-oriented. There's not a ton of platforming in them, really. It's mostly go, 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 fast, fast, fast the entire time, whereas if you look at the original Sonic games, most of what you do is at a bit of a slower pace. It's mostly platforming, and Robo Blast 2 really does have that vibe to it. And because of the way its physics work, there's honestly not even really that many speed sections in here, but I honestly don't have a problem with that because it puts a lot of emphasis on the platforming stuff. And that's what it does really strongly, especially in like the physics department. While there's some wonkiness here to like how the physics work, the general controls and game feel here are really, really good once you get the hang of it. This game has really good feeling, well-tuned momentum where in order to make those jumps, especially if you want to do it quickly, you really gotta line yourself up properly, make sure you don't have too much speed and you're gonna overshoot the platform, pull back to land where you want to. And just doing that kind of thing in a 3D Sonic game, it feels great. It feels so Sonic. And another thing that feels so Sonic in this is the enemy bouncing. No game has as good feeling enemy bouncing as this game does, not even the originals. And this game has no homing attack of any kind, and you know what? It's totally fine, and it works. With proper momentum and good controls, you don't need the homing attack. It's really not that hard to do like these big enemy bounce chains. Like players might say, the average player can't do that. But honestly, I find this easier than it is in the 2D games because I can actually see what I'm landing on. You know, in the 2D games, when you're bouncing so high up, you don't know what you're landing on. You just have to memorize the enemy placements. Here, I can look at the enemy, I can see my trajectory, I can make adjustments and make sure I land on them. And I really don't think it's that difficult or asking that much. Now, granted, I will say there is a bit of wonkiness to the controls here that I don't love. The acceleration curve on your characters feels a bit weird, and the gravity is very strange. Like, you don't jump very high, but you have a lot of airtime, which feels very weird. And a common criticism you see for Robo Blast 2 is there's not really much in the way of, like, slope stuff, which is true. There are slopes in the game, and they do affect your speed, kind of, but they don't really use it that much, and the way that, like, slope jumping works, it feels a little strange sometimes. And this game also uses Sonic 1 rules, so when you're running on foot, you actually can't accelerate beyond your base speed. You have to be rolling in order to do that. So it's a little bit weird and some odd choices there, but once you get the feel for things, I think it's okay. But I do generally agree that those things could be adjusted, and I would like to see the game have a greater emphasis on, like, slope physics type stuff, because the potential is here. You can slope jump and you can use it for shortcuts. It's just not a huge focus of the game. But fortunately, the developers are aware of all these things, and they're working on making those adjustments for Sonic Robo Blast version 2.3, so I'm sure this game is just gonna get better and better over time. Another thing I like about this game that's sometimes criticized by people, and I get it, is the level design. Specifically the way that the levels are not these straight shots where you're just going forward the entire time. There's a lot of bigger open areas, there's a lot of routes wrapping around each other, there's a lot of twists and turns going on here. It's not like a lot of 3D Sonic games where you just go down the hallway and then maybe you make a turn every now and then. Here, you're really going all over the place. But as a consequence of that, many people find the levels in this game to be rather confusing, and generally I don't find that. find most of the levels pretty okay and understandable. But yeah, even myself sometimes, especially in the Egg Castle levels, I don't know which path leads to where. Trying to figure out like what are the optimal routes can be really difficult because it's hard to even orient yourself and like understand where you are in the level right now in reference to all the other parts of the level because it's just twisting around itself so many times. And I've seen a number of people say they struggle to sometimes tell which way is supposed to be forward. I've never had a problem with that. I feel like I got a good game sense for that kind of thing. But I definitely could see how people could get turned around in these levels pretty easily. Though personally, I find that to be a very minor quibble with this game. Overall, I think it's so much fun, and this is a full-on, real, complete package of a Sonic game. You got a bunch of levels here, 2 acts per zone, boss fight at the end. Probably gonna take you about 3.5 hours or so for an initial first playthrough. Feels very much like what you would want out of a 3D Sonic game like this. It's just awesome. You got Chaos Emeralds, you got special stages. The special stages here are pretty cool. They're Knights levels, and even though I'm not the biggest fan of Knights, the reference is pretty neat. You know, if you're gonna make a special stage minigame, making a reference to another Sonic Team game is pretty cool, especially Knights and Sonic have so much of a connection with each other. And you know what? The boss fights in this game, they're not terrible, I find. I still wouldn't say they're anything exceptional, really. But they can be kind of fun to do. They're a little bit more involved than what you find in a lot of official Sonic games, so that's nice. And I gotta say, aesthetically, this game is everything I could ever want out of a 3D Sonic game. The limitations of the Doom engine here actually work wonderfully in its favor, because it gives that whole, like, 90s early 3D platformer low-poly vibe, but it's a classic Sonic game, and you know me, I love myself some classic Sonic. And I've always felt so robbed that we never got that 3D classic Sonic game on Saturn, and that's kind of like where these visuals are at. I love the 3D models in this game. I love the low frame rate animation on them. I love the way they look. I love everything about it visually. You know, this game having the technical limitations it does, it feels like I could just pretend that this is the game that came after Sonic 3 and Knuckles, and I'm very happy with that. Plus, the music in this game is so freaking good. Oh my god, this game is just doing everything that I want out of a Sonic game. I love it, I love it, I love it. And we haven't even started talking about Time Attack and the other playable characters, and that stuff is also awesome too. You got a lot of your usual suspects, Tails, Knuckles, Amy, Metal Sonic, but also Fang is playable here, and they have your expected movesets. But Fang, he's got his tail bounce, you can go around like that, and it's super fun. Metal Sonic can hover, and that gives him access to lots of cool shortcuts. Plus, he gets kind of like a boost mode from like Sonic Advance 2 or 3, but it lets him plow through enemies and obstacles as well, and that's fun. Amy is interesting. She has kind of an Advance-esque moveset. She doesn't curl in a ball, but she can jump higher than the other characters, and she's got that awesome Advance thing where you can hit springs with her hammer, and they launch her with greater force, and that creates all kinds of cool shortcuts for her. Time Attack in this game is actually really sick because the 3D and the level design, the way it's done here, all the characters can take such radically different routes from each other. You actually get a very different experience depending on who you play as. Obviously, Tails, you can just fly over a lot of things, but that means finding, like, these new shortcuts, because as I said, it's kind of hard to tell, like, the way the levels are oriented around each other, so now when you don't even need to do the routes, it's like, where do I go? And it's kind of cool. And then Knuckles, like, this totally makes his gliding and climbing work in a 3D linear obstacle course. It doesn't break the game, because generally you're in, like, these bowl areas, so you can't just fly right to the end. This is the exact kind of thing I'm looking for, with multiple playable characters in a Sonic game. The same general core gameplay and experience, but just slightly different, lets you play the levels differently. Some levels even have unique areas built specifically for certain characters, which is super cool. This game just does everything right. I love it. I think this game is super duper awesome, and it can be made even more awesome with mods, because this game has an absolutely gigantic modding community, and there's so much you can do to make this game even better. First of all, there's an infinite number of additional playable characters with their own cool movesets and a lot of good sprite art, or even 3D models in some cases that look really good. There is an endless amount of custom levels you can play, but then beyond all that, there's also a lot of good just like quality of life stuff and improvements and adjustments you can make to the game. Like, one that I really like is improving the spin dash, because the spin dash in this game is kind of crappy. You just charge it over time, and it takes way too long to charge and launches you off with way too little speed. You basically never use it. Well, there's a mod that you can make it work more like the actual spin dash from the 2D Sonic games. You hold crouch, mash jump, release, launch off with a ton of speed. And again, it feels so much like the original Sonic games. The way you have to come to a stop, pulling against your current momentum, then you hit crouch, mash jump, let go. It feels so right, and I love it. And there's tons of other mods that you can add on to SRB2 to make it feel even better, many of which I've added to my spreadsheet, which will be linked in the description. And I even kind of put together my own little mod as well, although it's mostly just me taking other people's mods and making some changes and putting them together. But I don't really like the way Sonic plays in Robo Blast 2, honestly. He gets this ability that they call the Thok, which is basically an air dash power that he has, and it's really overpowered, in my opinion. It launches you faster than Sonic can move under any other circumstances, so it means the way to play Sonic is to just Thok constantly all over the place. And one, that doesn't feel very right for Sonic to have an ability like this, because most players are not going to use this, because it's very, like, out of control and hard to use. Sonic should have moves that are more easy to understand and grasp for general players, because he's going to be the first character many players try. And also, it just doesn't feel very Sonic to me. You know, again, Sonic should be running on the ground. He shouldn't be launching himself through the air constantly. So, I put together a little mod where we swap out the Thok for the Insta-Shield and Drop Dash, just like you find in many of the 2D Sonic games, with like their enhancement mods and max control and stuff, and it works really well. It feels great. The Insta-Shield is useful in the exact same ways it is in the 2D games. You can use the invincibility to take some shortcuts where you don't have to wait on hazards, and the increased hitbox size helps as a nice aid for landing on those enemies if you struggle with that without the aid of a homing attack. And the drop dash works really well for another thing I threw onto this mod, the boost mode from Sonic Advance 2 and 3, triggered in the same way, run on the ground for long enough, and boom, your speed will be increased. But hit anything and come to a stop or slow down too much while on the ground, and you're gonna lose it. And the drop dash works as a great way to allow you to keep the boost state in situations where the game would otherwise force you to lose it, such as a spring up against a wall, you got no speed, well, you can drop dash to keep on going. It's very fun. Also gave Sonic the peel out, giving you near instant access to the boost mode speed, but a little bit slower, and of course you gotta come to a stop and build up for it, so there's a bit of trade-off, risk-reward there. Sometimes you want to spin dash, sometimes you want to use the peel out. I think it all comes together pretty well and makes for a very fun Sonic moveset. So I guess this video also kind of acts as the release trailer for this mod, so if this looks fun to you, go check it out, let me know what you think of it. Anyway, that is Sonic Robo Blast 2. Easily one of my favorite Sonic games, period. I think this game is so much fun, and similar to Sonic Utopia, I love this game for showing another way to do a 3D Sonic game. Because this game's development began before the release of even Sonic Adventure, it is completely divorced from all the notions of what a 3D Sonic game is. It doesn't suffer from the stagnation of 3D Sonic that we see in the official games. By the way, you should watch Telekinetic Man's video, it's really good. This is the kind of thing I would love to see out of official Sonic. Not that it necessarily needs to play like Utopia or Robo Blast 2 specifically, but just a rethinking of 3D Sonic from the ground up. Throw away everything that 3D Sonic has been and reapproach what a 3D Sonic game is, and you can end up with something like this, and it's great. And unlike Utopia or GT or many others, this is a full game. This is a full experience. You don't get a taste of what 3D Sonic could be. You just get a great, super fun, awesome 3D Sonic game, and I love it.